Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The minimum wage is one of those things that most Americans know about, or at least they think they know about it. The minimum wage is a political concept which has been incorporated into law. The concept is that people need more money than they are currently receiving to live a decent life. The law names an hourly wage below which a business may not hire employees. There are a few exceptions. The minimum wage also influences the cost of goods sold to the public. As the cost of labor at a McDonald's restaurant goes up, so too does its menu prices. To keep its menu prices down, McDonald's may substitute ordering machines for people now working at the front counter. Our guest today is John Wright. Mr. Wright is a policy analyst for Show Me Institute. His focus is government transparency and labor relations. He analyzes minimum wage policy at local and state levels to discover how minimum wage increases affect low-skilled workers and small businesses. He also studies government transparency in public university curriculum, collective bargaining, and public pensions. During this half hour, we'll be discussing the economic effect of the minimum wage. John Wright, welcome to Conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So, what makes you such an expert?
Well, are you asking kind of where I come from and how I got into this? So
Yeah, that's what I'm asking is, you're a young man. Mm-hmm. There's people out there that are closer to my age than they are to your age. Mm-hmm. Why is it that you're here today instead of some old professor type?
Right. Well, I'm here today because this is what I study at the Show Me Institute. I've spent a lot of time researching minimum wage policy, labor policies, and kind of the economics and the legal implications of those things. They could probably have somebody a little bit older come, but they probably have to pay them more. So,
there you go.
Yeah, there you go. That's
hopefully, I'm not paying you the minimum wage.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
First of all, tell people who don't know what the Show Me Institute is, right, what that is.
So the Show Me Institute is Missouri's free market think tank. And what that means is we do, we research, we analyze public policy that affects Missouri government, state and local government. And we have a free market perspective. We also have a research-based perspective. So we conduct a number of studies, or we contract with prominent professors, prominent scholars to conduct these studies. And then we go around and we explain the implications of the research and hopefully educate the public so that it can improve public policy for the state of Missouri.
Okay. There have been attempts in this country recently to raise the minimum wage.
Yes.
Okay. So what's your attitude about raising the minimum wage? Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think that's a bad thing, or do you think it's not a thing?
Well, we want to raise wages. That's a good thing. Whether a government mandated minimum wage actually does that and actually helps people, that's the thing I'm not so sure about. When you artificially raise the minimum wage, you price a lot of people out of the marketplace. Basically, you kill jobs. So you have this perverse effect where you're in theory, you're trying to help low-skilled workers, people working at retail and food service industry being paid minimum wage. You're trying to help them, trying to make sure they get paid more money. But the effect is you often price a lot of these people out of the job. You hurt the people you're trying to help.
Well, you're aware that I wasn't just making that up about the ordering machines at McDonald's. I actually have seen those.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I know that at a certain point, it will be more economically beneficial to the company to simply have these ordering machines where people can walk up, put in the order exactly the way they want it, swipe the card or put in some cash, and then the people in the back just produce the food and bring it up front.
Right. If I'm not sure how much these ordering machines cost, but you could imagine they cost X dollars per hour. You probably pay some upfront costs, and then after the financing and paying for it over the course of the useful life of the machine, it comes down to maybe it's $10 an hour, maybe it's $15 an hour, whatever. There's some kind of cost that the business pays to institute these machines. Now, if you artificially raise the price of labor above that cost, then it just makes economic sense to purchase these machines instead. So suppose these things cost $20 an hour, but there's improvements being made every year, and these machines are now $17 an hour. In a few years, they'll be $15 an hour, $14 an hour, $13 an hour. If you raise the minimum wage up to $15 an hour, it's more expensive to hire actual people, it's just economics.
Now, I had said and wrote actually some months ago that I felt this way about when I saw all these demonstrations at various McDonald's around the country. I said that what McDonald's should have done is they should have gone on TV with their commercials, because they're always running commercials, so it's not like it's going to cost them extra to do this. But instead of, the happy, talking about the Happy Meal, to talk about this situation and say, look, some of our employees would like to make $15 an hour. At that rate, a Big Mac will cost this, a fry will cost that, soda will cost this. If you guys are okay with these higher prices, no problem, we'll pay $15 an hour. If you're not willing to pay these higher prices, let us know, and then we can't afford it. And I thought that McDonald's would have done itself a favor by having taken that high road. But instead, if you go to McDonald's now, you'll see that their prices have just gone up automatically. They haven't spoken about it, but prices have gone up. I was shocked. I hadn't been in McDonald's in a while, and I was there a couple weeks ago, and I was like, wow, dollar menu's gone.
Right. Well, McDonald's is one thing. McDonald's will be around no matter what. I mean, if you raise the price of labor to a certain point, then McDonald's will just they'll just put these machines in a McDonald's instead. Who's really hurt by this are the workers who are going to lose their job, right, and the small businesses. At the Show Me Institute, when the city of St. Louis was considering a $15 minimum wage, this was last summer.
2015?
Yes,
yeah.
2015. When they were considering a $15 minimum wage, we heard from a lot of small businesses and even workers who were saying, well, we're just not going to be able to operate. We're not going to have jobs, especially the communities in St. Louis that are poorer.
What kind of businesses were concerned that at $15 an hour they simply couldn't make enough money to stay in business?
It was a lot of restaurants, small restaurants, family-owned restaurants, one shop, maybe a mom and pop place. There were also I talked to some people who were in the auto industry, and they were concerned. They were mechanics, things like that, and they were concerned that it was going to put the price of labor higher than their skilled workers, and that was going to cause all sorts of problems for them. There were secondhand shops, things like that. But if you go to Show Me Institute's website, you could see the short documentary we did on this community, Dutchtown, in South St. Louis. It's a somewhat poor community that's trying to come back. In recent years, it's made somewhat of an effort to come back, somewhat of an effort to revitalize the community through small businesses, through small restaurants and things like that. And the owners of these restaurants were telling me, we pay our workers as much as we can, but we're already breaking even, or this is a labor of love for us. If you raise it to $15, we're going to have to go out of business. We're going to have to move into the county. So the people who are really hurt are the people who work for minimum wage, the small businesses, and the communities that are poorer and where not a McDonald's and a 7-Eleven and a Walmart doesn't want to do business because it's just a poor community with a lot more crime.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned skilled labor.
Right.
Now, when the minimum wage goes up, I understand that has some implication for union contracts.
It could. It depends on the contract. It depends on how the contract is negotiated and that sort of thing.
I'm not familiar with this. Do you know anything more about that?
Well, each individual union negotiates a contract for its workers with their employer. That's generally how the union contract works. So I've seen contracts before that tie the pay scale to minimum wage, but I wouldn't say that most contracts do that. Some may. Okay. When you see the groups protesting for the minimum wage, It's not your skilled trade unions, your traditional labor unions that are doing this. They already they have their own setup when it comes to contracting, collective bargaining, on how that they can work for their workers. Right. Minimum wage wouldn't necessarily benefit skilled workers.
Well, they have professional negotiators anyway.
That's right. Yeah.
They don't need to be standing out on the street screaming and yelling, right, unless it's gone to a strike.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now there is also, and somebody actually asked me about this when I told them that I was going to be talking to you about the minimum wage, and she wanted to make sure that I asked this question. Okay. Said that there is a national minimum wage, yes, set by the United States, and she said, but nobody who works for the federal government is making minimum wage. What is the sense of having a national minimum wage? That was one question. And then the second question was, shouldn't this be left to the various states to set, based on their conditions in their state, a minimum wage?
Yeah, I would agree with that. The national minimum wage is $7.25 right now, perhaps $7.35. There's been talk of increasing the national minimum wage to $15 an hour. This will hurt a lot of people, and the areas that will be hurt more are the low-cost states like Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, or the low-cost communities where the cost of living is cheaper and the wages are cheaper, in part because of that.
Well, I don't think that people in Washington, the bureaucrats, that is, not the representatives, because they travel to all these out-of-the-way places, but the bureaucrats don't seem to understand, even in a place like Michigan, for example, where the cost of living, perhaps in the Detroit area, may be higher, but you get up into the Thumb or up near Mackinac, the Mackinac Bridge.
Right.
The price of living, as you just said, is much less, and therefore it would be a much more difficult problem for these restaurateurs and people who are running dry cleaning establishments, etc.
Well, even manufacturing. I mean, at a certain point, it becomes absurd to cut out this part of the labor force. And if you're talking about a place like Arkansas or parts of Missouri where land is very cheap, rents are very cheap, and wages are lower, but people are relatively wealthy just because of how much cheaper the cost of living is. If you're talking about those places will be devastated by a very high minimum wage. It won't affect Manhattan as much because probably the market clearing rate for low skilled labor is probably right about the $15 minimum wage anyway. So it won't hurt Manhattan as much. It may hurt some workers in Manhattan, some small businesses, but the economy as a whole will be fine there. But when you come to the South and you come to the Midwest, where cost of living is lower, it's not likely to end well.
Long ago, when I was a young person, maybe closer to your age, I read a book about the labor prices in the Middle Ages, and specifically, a professor had done work and showed before the plague hit what labor rates were in England and France, and then after the plague hit, when so many of the laborers were dead, that the price of labor went way up.
Yeah.
And made an interesting point. And just when I was studying up, getting ready for this interview, I come to find out that I think it was around 1348 that Richard, and that was right after the plague, that Richard III had passed a law for a maximum wage, because apparently labor was in such short supply that people could demand more and more and more.
Right. They could demand more, and the nobles went to the king and said, fix the price of labor so I don't have to pay him as much. I don't think that worked. I remember reading that skilled peasants could just leave. They weren't allowed to legally to leave their noble, to leave the land they were bound to, but they did anyway, and there wasn't a lot the government could do to stop workers from exercising their power in that position.
So then the maximum wage then years later led to the minimum wage when people were in society. It was noticed that people weren't actually able to support their family in any kind of a decent way. And I think that's really the whole point of the minimum wage, is that it's in the heart when people look at how little trading value 8 hours of labor actually has for some families. You can only trade for, a couple of cans of tuna, and you're not going to get a really nice house. You'd be lucky to pay for your your little basement apartment. I believe that was the idea, was to try and at least hold people where they're not looking like middle-aged peasants.
And I think, and that may be right, that for a lot of people that's why they support a minimum wage, because they believe that it will enrich these people who are working these types of jobs. But the fact is, there's no shortcut to prosperity. The minimum wage, while it may have good intentions, it's just going to price people out of the labor market. It's going to hurt the people who it's intended to help.
Why don't you explain to people why you believe that artificially raising, just by a political decision, the cost that businesses must pay to laborers, workers, why that hurts those workers in the long run?
Yeah. So prices are determined by supply and demand. I don't want to go into the whole economics 101 thing, but
I think most people understand. If there's a whole bunch of apples, price is low. When there's only a few apples, the price goes up.
Right. So I think a useful thought experiment is to think, how much value is a worker creating for the organization that he or she works for per hour? Suppose that when I work, I'm producing $10 of value for my employer per hour. Now maybe they pay me $9 an hour, so they're getting $1 from my labor. They have to pay me $9 to keep me around, but that makes it worthwhile that they pay me that $1. Now if the government came and said, you have to pay him $10 an hour, and what I produce is $10 an hour, now I'm not producing anything for the business. And if the price of labor was artificially increased to $15 an hour, now for each hour I work, by producing $10 an hour, I am costing the business I work for $5. They're operating at a loss if they hire me. Now, if you're operating a business and you're running the business as a charity and the purpose is just to employ people as a sort of a charitable act, then maybe you'll hire people and you'll retain them at a wage that exceeds the value they produce. But if that's not how the business operates, and most businesses don't operate that way, then what you'll see is businesses will have no choice but to go out of business, hire somebody who can produce more value, substitute labor for capital, meaning machinery and things like that. And that's just the iron law of demand. There's really not much way around that. You just can't fix prices to improve people's lot. This is not the way to go about addressing poverty and the issues of the working poor, which are very real issues, and I think most people do care about. But this is the absolute wrong way to go about fixing that problem.
All right. Well, in your opinion, what would be the right way?
Well, I don't think there are shortcuts to prosperity. If you want people to take in $15 an hour, they need to produce 15 or more in value for whatever organization they work for, be it their own small business or some labor they do or they contract for, or if they're an employee. And how do you increase the value of somebody's labor? Education helps, training, experience, skills. So there's an educational issue here. There's an issue of allowing people to maybe work for lower wages, work for an internship so that they can get their foot in the door, or they can grab onto that first rung of the economic ladder and climb their way up. If you look at we were talking about medieval England earlier, if you look at the history of everything, you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution and all this sorts of stuff, we are tremendously rich compared to how people were back in the medieval times. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, over 90% of society, of Western society, was involved in agriculture, and it was people operating without heavy machinery. And
at subsistence levels.
At subsistence levels. And with the advent of mechanization, capital improvements, and a skilled workforce, we were able to really improve everybody's lot quite a lot. And that's what you need to continue to do.
Seems to me that there's some people in our society who don't seem to understand that there are two methods. You know, you talk about redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
You've heard that phrase before. There's two means in Western society of redistribution of wealth. The main reason, and the one that you just addressed, was through the wages and salaries system, in which a corporation earns money and then redistributes that money through the wages or salaries that they're paying labor, and then those people, you know, have a better life at home because they have exchange. The paper that they get can buy them a car, can buy
Right.
them food, can buy them a house or rent a house. And then the other system is by political fiat, where the government just says, here's the money. That system there doesn't have any checks and balances on it, because the money has nothing to do with where's the income to pay for here's the money. And that's one of the reasons people forget why the Soviet Union went out of business. The Soviet Union basically went into bankruptcy, Chapter 11, and then they just reorganized, came out with the new name of Russia. And they were able to cut their debts, cut their costs, and come back as a nation. And nations do that. The United States right now is handing out a lot of cash out of a treasury system, and the treasury system has to take money in. But at some point, you may be handing out a lot more businesses than you can afford, and therefore, as a nation, it goes out of business. Businesses are the same way. They either, they either take in enough money in order to pay their bills, pay their employees, pay the people who put money into the business, or the business stops operating.
Right. Right. I mean, you want to get back to the thing of who really benefits from these proposals, from these minimum wage proposals or other proposals that are aimed at helping people and bringing people up out of poverty or bringing people into a middle class lifestyle. And I would submit to you that with the minimum wage, you're not helping hardly anyone. You're certainly not helping the workers, the low skilled workers who are targeted by the minimum wage.
Well, there are many people who disagree with you.
Yeah,
They really do believe that, holy cow, if I'm being paid $8 an hour and I work an 8-hour day, then I get $64 minus taxes. So let's just say that they got $60 for the day. Well, that's not much.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's not a shortcut here. I think one. So we're assuming good intentions, good motives here, but I think people aren't completely ignorant to economics. And when California passed their $15 minimum wage, I think I saw Jerry Brown give a speech, the governor of California, and he talked about it. And he even acknowledged that this doesn't make economic sense, what you're doing. Now, he had to do it. It's the political reality that there were enough people who were either ignorant of economics or somehow thought they could benefit from a minimum wage who sort of forced the government's hand there. And I don't know exactly who those people are and what they are, but you could see that if this is going to hurt small businesses, drive them out of the marketplace, that is decreasing someone's competition somewhere along the line. There's somebody who's benefiting from the minimum wage. It's not the low-skilled worker. It's not the person who you'd want it to benefit. But there is somebody who benefits out there who doesn't have as much competition, as much people to compete with. That's something that I'd also like to explore, and that I'd like people to think about at least and start asking questions, because the economics is really simple on this point. I mean, if you can't artificially increase, you can't fix prices here or there and expect to have a good result. You create deadweight loss, you create inefficiencies. In the case of labor, inefficiencies means lost jobs. So it means people do much worse.
Either that or the business, if it's forced to continue to pay more than it's taking in, then it stops being a business. By the way, we got about 4 minutes left here.
Okay.
Is there anything that you wanted to say that I haven't asked you, or is there something you want to talk about, or something from the Show Me that that's important for people to know?
Well, we did do that video I mentioned earlier on Dutchtown, this struggling community that's where the community's trying to revitalize the neighborhood. That's something that everybody should check out. It's a good video, and we follow the story of some low wage workers who work at these restaurants and the business owners, and how this is going to this minimum wage proposal would undercut their ability to revitalize the area.
This was the city's proposal.
The city's proposal to raise the minimum wage.
And that's already gone away, right?
That went away. They passed it, but there was a legal issue with it, and for that reason, it didn't go forward. But the issue of the $15 minimum wage is still around. You've got presidential candidates talking about it, doing it at a national level, and you've got people talking about doing it in Missouri, either through ballot initiative or through some other means. So people need to be vigilant. I mean, even if you believe that government should redistribute wealth and that's the way to fix things, I want to caution you against the minimum wage. It would be much more efficient to simply tax somebody who's rich and give the money to somebody who's not making as much money. That would be much better, even though that creates all sorts of problems too. That would be much better than just simply pricing people out of the marketplace. I mean, there's pretty much, that's one of the stupidest things you can do if you want to help low-skilled workers.
Well, as you said earlier, educating low-skilled workers so that their labor has higher trading value. I've had people sitting in that very chair right there who say, right here, near this location where we're taping, that there are something on the order of 1,500 jobs today that go unfilled because people haven't been trained to do it. And I'm talking about labor jobs. I'm talking about things like welders, people who look at computer-operated machines, and all they have to do is monitor them. Other people have to service these computer-operated machines. But those are jobs, by the way, that are paying $55 an hour in wages and in benefits.
Yeah, and people used to get apprenticeships. They'd hang out at the shop, maybe get paid a few dollars an hour, not enough to support a family, but they were teenagers or whatever, and they'd pick up skills. And then they'd join the union, they'd get trained by the union, and they'd do things, and people would build things. And now that doesn't happen as much. You have these old way of doing things, the old way of these traditional labor unions where they train people, and that worked. And what you have now is you have a group like SCIU, and they're going around and just saying, hey, let's just demand this $15 minimum wage. They're not helping these people learn a skill, which would increase the productivity of the organization, and then labor could get wealth from that. And that's a real problem. So you don't have people who understand the kind of the economics of the thing, and because of that, they're arguing for these dumb policies that are going to hurt people.
Well, exactly. And
I think a good personal story to kind of illustrate my point is
quickly.
Yeah, quickly. So when we did the Dutchtown video in St. Louis, the minimum wage proposal there, we found this kid, JJ, who worked at this restaurant. Now he went to school, and he didn't go on to college. That just wasn't his thing. He didn't learn all this all the sorts of skills from that. But he was able to get his foot in the door at this restaurant, and working at the restaurant, he really learned a lot of skills that were helping him out. He can be a cook. He can get paid a much higher wage because he got his foot in the door working at the minimum wage.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your coming and speaking to us today.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with John Wright. He's with the Show Me Institute. We've been talking about the minimum wage here today. He has material at the Show Me Institute website, which you have seen on the screen. This is going to be uploaded to YouTube, so if you want to show it to your friends, go to YouTube, look up Conversation with Lee Presser, John Wright. Thank you. Bye-bye.